Tonight's talk, I come to you with 4 gifts. The first gift is a lotus flower. Do you understand? My second gift is a golden net. Can you recognize it? My third gift is a shepherd's round dance. Do your feet know how to dance? My fourth gift is a garden planted in a wilderness. Could you work there? I come to you with 4 gifts. Dare you accept them? So this is the poem, The 4 Gifts from Sanghajiva, that we've been, well, it's been accompanying this series that we've been looking at over the last few weeks. So I'll start the talk with just a brief recap of what we've been looking at so far. And this is the 50th anniversary of this series of lectures. So in 1976, Bhante Sanghajiva gave this series of lectures called Buddhism for Today and Tomorrow. And we sometimes in the movement know them as the Brighton Lectures because they were given at the Brighton Pavilion. There was a book available, and it's available from all good bookshops, including ours at the moment, to support this series. And well, Bodhinaga kicked off the series a few weeks ago with a very important question. What is life for? What is life for? And further questions came out of that for me. What am I doing with my life? And what could I do with my life? So it's a really big question that he opened up straight away. And one of the answers for me, perhaps the answer, is that we can grow. We can grow. We can grow to be so much more than what we are currently. And we've learned that our growth, our spiritual development, consists of 5 great stages, as outlined by Bhante Sanghajiva. These are integration, positive emotion, receptivity, which I'm going to talk about tonight, and then spiritual death, spiritual rebirth. And we've learned that in the stage or practice of integration, what we're trying to do is get our whole selves behind our spiritual endeavours. We've got lots of conflicting selves that all want to do different things. They all want to do their own things. And that without integration, we'll always have these different parts of ourselves wanting to go somewhere else and do something else. Something maybe less challenging, maybe a bit more familiar to us. And last week, Nagavajri introduced us to positive emotion and developing these faculties of gratitude, of metta, compassion. Without these, we're not going to grow. So these, along with receptivity, are sort of foundational practices. So tonight's talk, really, I'm going to be exploring what is receptivity, why do we practice this, and how do we practice this. So let's begin by looking at mine and perhaps your entry into this Buddhist centre, or maybe a different Buddhist centre, and where we are now. Because we have all demonstrated receptivity to some degree to still be here. So when I first walked into this centre, I knew very little about what the Buddha had to say. But my mind was open, it was available, it was ready to receive, and it was inquiring. I had a willingness to change my mind, a willingness to participate, and a willingness to respond positively. And I would imagine that many of you have responded to the Dharma with receptivity. So let's look at this willingness. I quite like this word because I think it's a vital ingredient of receptivity. So when I first came along to the centre, my main motivation at the time was dissatisfaction. I may not have fully been aware of it, but I was dissatisfied with where my life was going. I was drifting. I was not really getting anywhere or going anywhere. But I did have an altruistic streak in me, but I didn't know how to apply it to anything. Didn't know where to put my energies into acting in the world. So perhaps unconsciously, I was prepared to change my mind. I was ready to change my mind. And in the first week of the introductory course, we learned we can change. How wonderful was that? What a wonderful message to receive on your first week. I'm ready to change. We can change. So my response was positive and it was willing. And we hear this expression from Bhante Sanghajiva that the Dharma is caught, not taught. Dharma is caught, not taught. And this could also be described as an element of receptivity. To take hold of what has been offered and to go with it. The truths that are on offer, they're offered to us and we take hold and we respond. So I had thought I was just coming to listen to people talking. And I'd go away and maybe I'd apply some of them somewhere in my life. But I quickly found myself in discussion groups, talking about my life and other people's lives, listening to them. And this was really unexpected. But I found very quickly this was exactly what I needed. And some people come along here initially to meditate, to develop calmness, to live more ethically, more simply. We all have different motives for first coming along. But we've probably all found that there's much more on offer than we first anticipated by staying with it, by remaining open and responding positively. And as we start to develop, we find that we're capable of responding more and more, sort of deeper and deeper. And we start to respond more to positive values in life. And these could be things such as nature and the arts and friendship, as well as the three jewels. So what we can do is, if we can find the beauty in what we're interested in, identify it, and then really follow it up and develop it and train it, and then bring this onto the journey, this is a real way of making progress. If, for example, it's nature that we really are drawn to, the beauty of nature, well, just consider this as a quote from Edward Carpenter. Let your mind be quiet, realizing the beauty of the world and the immense, boundless treasures that it holds in store. An example of receptivity to nature. And as we become more responsive to our Dharma lives, we may want to deepen our practice by getting more involved, volunteering, going on retreats. And we may get a more of a felt sense that this is the truth of things. In terms of friendship and deepening and heightening our friendships, we learn to delight in our friends. We're attracted by them and to them. We don't particularly want anything from them other than to share time and their friendship. And for me, this heightened response meant I could let go of this particular idea that I carried around with me all my life, that the only people I could be friends with are people like me, whatever that means. I'd have spent a lifetime thinking that way. And I guess that meant people that share my sense of humour, or they share my background or condition. I learned to drop all that. Receptivity can also include questioning and healthy doubt. So I particularly enjoy being in discussion groups where people query the teachings, maybe because I'm such a faith type that I kind of take hold of something and I run with it very quickly. So it's really good for me to be in a group where people question and query it. Maybe they haven't fully connected with it, or they want further clarity. And I particularly remember being in a Mitra study group with somebody that was just like this. And periodically they would suddenly raise this question about, I've just been thinking about this no self thing again. Let's go over it again because I haven't quite got it, you know. And Andy's laughing because he probably remembers that, the person I'm talking about. But it was really good for me and the rest of the group to kind of have this person that in the group that wants to continually explore what the teachings mean to them. So doubt and skepticism are fine as long as they don't veer into cynicism. So cynicism comes from a real negative mental state. This can include things like trying to pick things apart, to dismantle the Dharmic truths, discredit the Buddha and the Sangha. And this usually comes about because people come up against something they really dislike, or they find it challenging, or they've got deeply held views about the particular topic. So there's room for healthy doubt in the spiritual life, but that's distinct from cynicism. And I wanted to read an example of receptivity from the Zen tradition, or I should say, not receptivity. And this concerns it says in this copy, a professor visits a Zen master to ask a question. And after they've spoken a little while and they've had the opening preliminaries, they sit down and the Zen master offers the professor some tea, which the professor gladly accepts. The Zen master begins to pour the tea into his cup. And he keeps pouring. And he keeps pouring. And the tea is rising further and further up the cup. And the professor, not wanting to appear rude or interrupt, he just sort of sits there and he observes. But eventually he sees the tea pouring over the top of the rim. It's pouring all over the table, running down the sides of the table. And he keeps pouring. And eventually, astonished, the professor says, "Well, what's happening? What are you doing?" He says, "My cup is full." The Zen master looks back and says, "Yes, exactly. Your cup is full. Come back when you're ready to receive the answers to your questions." So, maybe a question for us here is, are we the Zen master or are we the professor? Do we know when our cups are full? So, that's an example of somebody not being receptive. So why do we practice receptivity? Well, it's one of the conditions that help us to grow, and it's needed alongside the other stages that we've been talking about, the integration and positive emotion. We need them constantly alongside each other. And if we think of the growth of a plant, for example, well, we know that it needs warmth and water and oxygen and nutrients all at the same time. Ask any gardener, if you take away any of those ingredients, the plant's not really going to thrive. It doesn't work trying to develop one aspect at a time. We've got to have all these in sort of tandem with each other. So we need positive emotion, integration, receptivity, working alongside each other. And one of the aspects of growth is the development of wisdom. And there are 3 ways of developing wisdom. So not a long list, not a long Buddhist list, just 3. And the first one of these is through hearing and reading. We develop wisdom through hearing and reading. You might pick up something from tonight's talk, hopefully you will, that sort of resonates, or you've learned it for the first time maybe. Or that could be through reading. Shruti Maya Pranayama. And also we develop wisdom through reflecting on what we've heard. We take it away, we chew on it, we mull it over in our experience. Perhaps the taking away the ethical precepts from the intro course is an example of taking away a teaching and testing it in our own experience. And then we come to meditation. In meditation, where we allow the Dharma to seep into the very fibers of our being. Mysterious. So in meditation, receptivity involves having periods of effort and then relaxing that effort, feeling the effects of that effort, and notice. And then we notice sensations, responses, and feeling tone. And this can apply to both the mindfulness of breathing and the metta bhavana. But now I'm going to focus on the just sitting practice. The just sitting practice. Trying to make just sitting interesting. And we may well have done some of this here in short spells, perhaps at the end of meditation. I know that on the Sangha Night meditation, we sometimes have a minute at the end of just sitting, a chance to absorb the effects of the meditation. This is what just sitting is about. And it can act as a bridge to returning to our day-to-day, rather than moving straight from the concentrated situation to the next event. We've got this sort of bridge between them. And it could be really jarring, of course, if we don't do that. And the just sitting can also be a preparation to meditation, used before we start sitting. Arrive and be a bridge between the last activity and the meditation. And so what does this just sitting look like? What we mean by it? And normally, for reference, I go to Bhante for this. He's normally got a very thorough explanation of anything you ever want to know about Buddhist teachings. But unusually, in this case, when he was asked, what does just sitting look like, or what is it? He says, well, you just sit. So we need to sort of unpack that a little bit. And just sitting is a sense of not striving or not making an effort. But it's also not passive. So we have this sort of this sense of noticing what is there in our present experience and remaining aware. So this is the extent to which you're being active, you're being open, you're curious, but you're still completely relaxed. What just sitting isn't is a sort of a sleep-like torpor or a foggy, lazy void of nothingness. It's not that. You're not trying to avoid experience or change it at all. Because if you are, remember that these are aspects of craving. If we're looking at changing our experience, then there's a craving behind that. We're simply noticing what is there in our experience. And this practice can develop into an insight practice. So we can begin to see that all our thoughts and our moods, and our sensations, they rise and they cease. They rise and they cease. And that everything is like this. Purely change. Not just that all things change, all phenomena is change. And we can notice that in our just sitting practice. So this just sitting practice can become a meditation practice in its own way, as well as just the beginning and end of meditations. Longer periods than that. And thinking back to our practice of mindfulness of breathing and metta-bhavana, so we need a balance of effort and then receptivity. Because I'm sure we're all familiar with sitting here, trying too hard, with a clenched jaw, and a rigid posture, becoming willful and desperate for results, berating ourselves for not getting results, or getting concentrated. And then suddenly, when the bell goes to end the meditation, we're absorbed, we've relaxed. Or also in meditation, we can be too loose. We can drift and be aimless and be passive. So neither of these are in balance, neither of these are in harmony. And so we need a practice of effort in stepping back and observing. And this can be really useful. Another aid in this just sitting practice is to find pleasure in meditation. Where do we find the pleasure? Discover where it is and cultivate it. Because in meditation, as with the spiritual life as a whole, we need to find pleasure. Otherwise, nothing much is going to happen. We're not going to go very far if it's not pleasurable life, spiritual life. If meditation feels like a chore or it's never the right time, then we're going to be less inclined to do it. And for me personally, if ever I find myself having a bit of a dry patch or questioning what I'm doing, I remind myself why I'm doing the practice. Why am I doing it? And that's in order to grow. So that the people that I come into contact with will benefit from meeting a growing individual. So it's worth sort of reminding ourselves of our motivations. And when we think of pleasure in meditation, we can take inspiration from the Buddha himself. So prior to becoming the Buddha, he'd undergone extreme austerities in order to try and gain enlightenment, almost dying in the process, actually. And he suddenly remembered this experience as a young boy, watching men ploughing in a field while he was sat under the rose apple tree. So I'm just going to read a paragraph from the life of the Buddha, talking about this experience. And it says that a memory rose from the depths of Gautama's mind. He was a child again and sat beneath the rose apple tree in the beautiful countryside as his father ploughed his field, with joy and wonder arising in him as naturally as leaves sprouting on a tree. The memory of that moment of spontaneous blossoming was a message from a time of innocence, which contained all that was missing from his grim struggles with the flesh. The happiness he had felt was utterly different from attachment or craving, and the web of emotions connected with them. He recalled, I asked myself why I feared this happiness, which had nothing to do with sense pleasures or unwholesome qualities. Then I decided I would not fear it. And then he asked, might this in fact be the path to awakening? And he knew with utter certainty that it was. So, this is an example of pleasure in stillness, not reliant on the senses to glean that pleasure. The Buddha had realized that pleasure was needed in his meditation and in his spiritual life to make progress. The austerity wasn't working. Also interesting to note that the Buddha related this story to a person called Saccaka. It's in the sutta called the Mahasaccaka Sutta, who was described by Ananda as a controversialist and a discreditor of the Buddha. And the Buddha spoke to Saccaka out of his compassion. And I think we could read, for controversialists, we could read cynic, going back to that point about cynicism. So, this pleasure in stillness, this leads nicely into the practice of doing nothing outside of meditation. What does this mean, this doing nothing? I mean, I sometimes get asked, can you have a cup of tea and do nothing? Is that doing nothing? And I get different answers to that. My own personal sense of this is that even this is doing something. There is the action of raising and lowering the cup. There's the taste. It's actually filling a gap with something. It's answering a desire to be active, to avoid discomfort or boredom. But what is boredom like if we really examine it? That might be a question for the groups later. What is boredom really like if we examine it? Can we explore it? We might find it humiliating, actually, if we sit and do nothing and find ourselves empty. Empty, nothing to sustain us. We face a need to reach out from ourselves to something out there for fulfillment or meaning. It could be humiliating. It could be frightening. Well, I'd like to share an example of a time for myself on solitary retreat of doing nothing, which was extremely pleasurable. And on two occasions, actually. The first occasion was really unpromising material, really. It was a cold, grey February day. I was on a canal boat at Tinsley, looking out of the window on a Saturday morning, and nothing to see in particular. Leafless trees, grey sky, brackish, sort of brownish water around me. But after 15, 20 minutes or so maybe of just looking, I entered into a kind of flow state, if you like. It's very hard to describe, isn't it? It's very hard to describe what an experience is like to somebody else. But all I can say about that experience is that it reached a point at which there was no volition to continue, and yet there was no desire to stop either. It was just looking. It was just looking. I wasn't labeling anything, for example, sky, tree, grass, boat, water. I wasn't liking and I wasn't disliking. So there was no volition, no stopping. just a flow experience, just a life or energy of its own, until of course eventually it petered out with the call of nature or something to end it. But there was real pleasure in that. There was real pleasure in that, and I was simply looking at a very dull day in February. The other occasion was a very similar experience, but it was a much more pleasurable landscape. So you could say that there was pleasure in looking at just the beauty of the landscape. So I can get some sort of sense of what the Buddha experienced there, just sitting and looking. And along with this, I was lucky enough to be introduced to a poem by Bhante Sanghajiva just before going on my ordination retreat, and it's called The Great Works. The Great Works. And a couple of verses I'd like to read from that are particularly relevant. And they go like this. Day after day, beside my friend the mountain, I sit, and as in dream hear close at hand my neighbours, tall bamboo and bubbling fountain, talking words that I half understand. Not indolence or ennui, soul destroyers, nor sickness convalescent holds me here, but the great work, which to all mere enjoyers of doing must as idleness appear. I really enjoyed that because it really spoke to me. This was Bhante, I believe he was in Kalimpong at the time when this was happening. He was obviously going through a period of doing nothing quite a lot. And he also talks in the poem about communing with nature, nature looking back at him, observing him, being both the observer and the observed. And I tried to take that with me to Gukaloka on my ordination retreat. Like most other ordinaries, find my little spot, my favourite spot, and sit. I've got plenty of opportunity to do nothing. And try and recreate those lines from the poem. Nature looking back at me, being both observer and observed. And it kind of cut through to a degree this sort of the sense of myself being at the centre of the universe, that I was also being observed. I wasn't just a being that is in touch with everything out there. Everything is in touch with me as well. So, going back to this question, what is life for? What is life for? I've got another question to come from that, really, is it to be constantly active, doing something, being somewhere, meeting deadlines, crossing off the never-ending to-do list? Is this what it's for? Or can it be enriched, flavoured, more alive, more meaningful, by having pauses and gaps in our day-to-day events? Before moving on to the next task, can we stop, pause, and reflect? Bhante advises us to reflect on everything we do. Well, that's a challenge. Reflect on everything we do. That means everything we do, say, think. That's going to be made even harder if we never stop. And if we think in terms of the world of music, the composer Debussy said that music is the pauses and gaps between the notes. And in a way that makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, without the gaps, it's a cacophony of noise, isn't it? But the gaps between the notes are the music. And we can create that music in our lives by pausing and reflecting. Pausing and reflecting on our influence on the world and how it's influencing us. And one tool I've used recently has been a 1-minute samtime. Thank you, Pranyavidaya. Pranyavidaya is in my chapter and heard me talking about pauses and gaps and trying to create those in my life, and gave me a samtimer that measures a minute of time, and you can get them through in 5 minutes if you want to expand your horizons. But they're a very useful little tool in stopping and pausing between doing this or doing that, moving between A, moving between B. I think they're a very useful tool. And eventually, of course, like it's got to become a habit. It's got to become a habit. It's not an easy thing to remember to do. But eventually, of course, we can drop the sand time, and we can create our own gaps naturally. Pauses and gaps will come naturally. So we have these foundational practices of integration, positive emotion, and receptivity, and they're all needed all of the time to help us grow. And I'll leave the last word to Bhante Sangharakshita on receptivity. He says, receptivity to the Dharma will turn us inside out and upside down. It will transform us. Receptivity means that one should be prepared for a radical change in one's whole mode of being, one's whole way of life, one's whole way of looking at things. I come to you with a lotus flower. Do you understand?